We ask you to rest your hands upon all the elders of the nation. We ask for your continuous guidance upon them and their continuous protection. We ask you to mold our thoughts today as we seek to progress for duty of care on their behalf. These we ask in your merciful name. Amen.
Thank you, Senator Gale. Madam Clerk, do we have any apologies for absence? There are no apologies for absence. We do have two members of the committee joining us via video link, Senator Fraser Binns and Senator Longmore. Are we having technical issues? I hope not today.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, good morning. Good morning. Is our sound, are we having a sound issue?
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Morning,
good morning, Chair.
Longmore. Morning. I'm just trying to see if we're having a sound issue. Can
I'm hearing you clearly.
Yes, not with you, Dr. Longmore. We're having some sounds in the chamber. All right, can IT just confirm we're okay to go, please? But in the meantime, I want to welcome, we have some guests sitting in with us today. Students from the Heart NSTA Trust, Beechamville in Claremont. Yes? And they are here with two of their instructors. And I think we have 23 students in the gallery. So we welcome you. We welcome you to this parliamentary committee meeting. This is a special select committee of the Senate. So there are no members here from the House of Representatives today. And we hope you enjoy the sitting and ask lots of questions about how this committee came to be and the structures of Parliament and how it works. So welcome. And when you travel back, please do so safely. And I hope you will be full of knowledge and learning when you go. All right. Members, on the last occasion we heard our colleagues from Statin who gave us a wealth of information about the data in place in relation to the elderly, the trends of the elderly population, an increase in the elderly population, decline in birth rates. It was a very interesting presentation. I know the members enjoyed it and by the number of questions that they asked. Today, it is expected that we will hear the Legal Reform Department, and I have seen this rather thick volume of a brief that they have given us, and we thank you very much for that. But I do want to say, through my law firm, the members would remember that I often opine on the resources available to non-executive senators when they do the work of the Parliament. And so I'm thankful I have a great team at Golding Campbell and Associates who have come on board to help me to monitor the meetings and to sift through the material and just to act as a backup to the parliamentary team. Yes, but not free legal work though. But to that end, they have partnered with colleagues of ours in Canada to help us to monitor the meetings. So this meeting this morning and others, of course, this is all public information. PBCJ broadcasts this, so for those who aren't able to listen during the day, they get the opportunity to listen to it through the YouTube feed at their convenience. But Polytrack, who are friends of our firm, it's a software company out of Canada, and they're going to be monitoring the meetings as well through the public feed and providing my office with notes, summaries of the meeting to help us to follow along. And they promised to be able to do that within an hour of the end of each meeting. That's something we're going to be using for my office just to support me in my chairmanship of this committee, but I also will share with the members as well and with the Parliament the materials we get. So we thank them very much, and I will say a little bit more about their support of me as I go along. And let me just say very quickly, they're doing this at no cost to me, at no cost to my firm. And I thank them for their friendship and their support of the work that I'm trying to do here. So that said, I want to move very quickly into welcoming the Legal Reform Department. But before I do that, let me just ask Mrs. Beckford, we have some documents that we have laid on the table of the committee. There's an updated presentation from the Legal Reform Department and a presentation also on the state of the law on the care of the elderly in Jamaica. So one is the presentation that had been delivered before, and the other is an updated presentation. Very well. With that said, I want to ask the head of the Legal Reform Department, Ms. Wilkins, to introduce herself and her team, and we will get started. Oh, I apologize, Senator Morris. Thank you for that catch. Minutes are not quite ready for today. We've asked Mrs. Beckford will have them ready for our next meeting. So I apologize to the members for that. I did give her a little bit of room to be able to put us at the bottom of her pile this week, because I'm in some other committees that she's also the clerk, and I knew what was on her plate. So we will have those minutes delivered. Yes, and we've only had a week. We've only had a week. So I thank the committee members for their indulgence of that. Ms. Wilkins, over to you. Please introduce yourself and your team.
Okay. Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much, Chair. I am Nadine Wilkins. I am Director of the Legal Reform Department. And with me is my colleague, Ms. Mrs. Tesserine Roden, who is one of the legal officers in our department. And we both worked on this presentation, and we trust that it will be informative and that it will help this committee in pursuing its goals and achieving its goals. Thank you. Okay, so I should point out that a much larger document, this is a synopsis of a much larger document, and appendices are there. So a lot of documents that we refer to are in the appendix. Yeah, they're in the appendix. And is it 100 and odd pages, or is it just the? Yes, that's it. That's it. So yes, because we thought it would be useful for particularly the international conventions that underpin the policy development, that it would be available. All right then. So we're seeking to present the state of the law on the elderly in Jamaica within the context of healthy aging, as international conventions on laws on the care of the elderly from other jurisdictions, and indicating where it is that our legislative framework is wanting in relation to what the international conventions would prescribe. So healthy aging has been defined, the process of developing and maintaining the functional ability that enables well-being in older age. And you see where that quotation is taken from a report by CARFA. A study on aging in Jamaica published by the IDB in April 2022, quoting the U.S. Census Bureau, they projected that in Jamaica, the population aged 60 and over will double between 2025 and 2030. And I think that has was certainly borne out in the presentation by Statin in the meeting last week.
Just to indicate that, just touch your mic, we'll monitor it, because we lose you on the broadcast when you speak off the mic. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Okay. Save and accept that when I looked at the data coming from Statin and the one that is being quoted from the U.S. Census Bureau, there's a sort of difference in the numbers, because Statin's projection had pointed to 18% by 2050. And from this information here, it is pointing to the current figure of the senior citizen population at 14%. And if that is doubled, by 2030, we would be at 28%. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it jumped at me this morning when I was reviewing the documents.
I agree. Remember that there is a disparity there, and as I would expect that Statin would be their data would be the data that we would consider the most up to date and the most reliable. So it may well be that the U.S. Census Bureau may have been relying on and assessing data which is not necessarily current. I think the idea, though, is to kind of indicate that it is an issue that is impatient for action to be taken. And that is the takeaway from that quote. So there's no single law on the care and protection of the elderly in Jamaica. However, provision is made in laws that largely provide for the indigent. So this presentation will highlight that essential facilities and services are not part of a holistic program aimed at ensuring that all the needs of the elderly can be met. The Constitution is referenced here because the Constitution guarantees every, without reference to age, every person is guaranteed the right to human dignity, and therefore it is the backdrop against which all our laws should, and certainly the ones in dealing with the elderly, should be framed. So the regulatory framework concerning the needs of the elderly falls within the ambit of two ministries, by and large. It's the Ministry of Local and Labor and Social Security, as well as the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development. We're reviewing this framework in the category, we look at financial support, healthcare, and welfare. The National Insurance Act. This is the primary legislation providing financial support to individuals from retirement age until death. The Act provides for a compulsory national insurance scheme that provides old age benefit, widows or widowers benefit, orphans benefit, special child's benefit, funeral grant, a host of different benefits in relation to incapacity, disablement, or death arising from injury in employment, among other life events. It is to be noted that old age under the Act is synonymous with retirement age, and that may be something that needs to be looked at, because perhaps they should not be treated as as the same, and they perhaps should have different provisions depending on the stage at which the retired individual is at. This is the point, and we seem in our laws to have equated the two. So there's an old age pension and old age grant, which is Section 10 of the Act, and it provides for retired persons to receive a pension if they satisfy the contribution conditions, or there's an old age grant if the person doesn't satisfy those contribution conditions, they can receive an old age pension. And the old age pension is paid for life. The old age grant is paid to men and women who are 65 years or older. And the funeral grant, that's where an individual is in receipt of old age or invalidity pension immediately prior to death, or would have been entitled to such a pension. Of course, there is a lot more to these financial services that the NIS provides. We just carved out just some very skeletal aspects in relation to the elderly. The Pensions Public Service Act. This act establishes a contributory scheme for the public service for which payment of pensions, gratuities, and other allowances are paid to pensionable officers. Pensions are payable on the retirement age of 65 years for an officer who was 54 or younger at the time of its enactment in 2017, and for officers who were 55 years and over when the act came in. When it was enacted, the retirement age is amortized based on the date of birth of the officer. There's a whole schedule in that law determining their age of retirement. The Pension Superannuation Funds and Retirement Schemes Act. This is an approved retirement scheme. It's recognized under the pension. An approved retirement scheme is recognized under the Pension Superannuation Funds and Retirement Schemes Act, and it enables its members to save for their pension, which is provided to them at retirement until death. So members of the scheme may either be self-employed or employed and are neither contributors to are neither contributors to another scheme, nor have they transferred their benefits from an approved superann to an approved retirement scheme. Of course, again, there's a lot more to this program, which the Act sets out, but I don't think we needed to go into it in great detail, save to indicate that the private sector has provision for retirement, financial support after retirement for employed individuals. The Income Tax Act. It makes provision for a reduction in tax liability for individuals who are retired and are over the specified age, depending on the tax type. So tax types have different specifications. But sections 12(1)Z and 12(1)AB provide for the categories of exemption for individuals in receipt of a pension or have attained the age of 65 years as follows. Individuals who derived an income from a superann scheme or a pension fund under a statutory pension scheme or a scheme for payment from a superann fund approved by the commissioner. They're entitled to an exemption, and that exemption was 80,000 but was increased to 250,000 effective January 1, 2025. Individuals who have attained the age of 65 years are entitled to age exemption and may utilize it against the income from any source. Therefore, a pensioner is entitled to the pension exemption of 250,000 age exemption and the income tax threshold of 1.7 million. Equally.
Ms. Wilkins, Sorry to cut you, but in plain language, what does this mean? It means that people from the private sector are...
Well, everybody.
Right.
Yes.
Everybody is entitled to an exemption. But when you talk about, can you just break it down a little bit? Because when you talk about the Pension Superannuation Funds and Retirement Schemes Act, can you just simplify the language a little bit for some of our folks listening, please?
Well, these schemes are managed by employers, and there are different configurations and arrangements depending on the nature of the business that they do, and the employers are members of the scheme. And each one has their own set of rules and different plan rules. Yes, yes. But it is being noted because it is one of the ways in which retired individuals who have worked in the private sector receive income after retirement. And in the case of the Income Tax Act, the income they receive after retirement is not treated in the same way as the employed individual who is under the age of 65. Their tax liability is drastically reduced.
Right. While she went on that, Ms. Wilkins, if you go back to the pension superannuation funds and retirement schemes, where members of the approved retirement scheme may be either self-employed or employed, and are neither contributors to another approved superannuation or pension scheme, nor have they transferred their pension benefits from an approved superannuation fund to an approved retirement scheme on termination. I just need a little clarity on that, because you have them in the approved superannuation scheme in the workplace, but you may have approved retirement schemes. Now, is this upon retirement that they are not able to transfer to the a retirement scheme? I just wanted to understand what is being said here.
Okay, so I think this is a paraphrase of what's actually in the Act.
In the, okay.
Yes. I guess it depends on the situation. They could have been in an approved superannuation fund scheme and they have transferred over to an approved retirement scheme when they are no longer working.
When they are no longer working.
Yes.
Okay, so it gives them the opportunity. If I'm in company A and I'm in a superannuation fund and I decide to leave or I'm terminated for whatever reason.
Correct.
It means I can transfer the funds that were in the superannuation into a retirement scheme.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Yes. Of course, it would be good for the tax department to provide clarity, more detail on that, but that's my understanding.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
All right, so social assistance programs within the financial support. So this is not mandated in legislation, but we thought it would be useful to indicate that financial support is being given to the elderly, notwithstanding that there isn't a law requiring that it be done, so that, you know, we present the full picture. So the Public Assistance Division, the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, has schemes where financial support is given to the elderly. So there's a rehabilitation assistance grant, a compassionate assistance grant, an emergency assistance grant. The details of each of these grants, I think, do we have it in the bigger document? I think we do. I think we have some more detail on each of these grants. But for the presentation, we didn't think it needed to. Yes, yes. So each one is explained. Yes, in that document. It would be on, what page is that though? Page isn't printed.
You're on. Leave it.
Okay. Yeah. If I was saying that you indicated that there are no law outlining social support for senior citizens. But if my memory serves me well, the Poor Relief Act has some provision in it for the elderly poor. You can check on that.
Yes, no, we intend to discuss that under welfare.
Okay.
We were really dealing with putting them in the different categories, but we will discuss poor relief. But remember, the statement is, you know, that there is no law providing for the holistic care. Because, and this is within the context of healthy aging. So the welfare or all aspects of the life of a person over the age of 60, because our law doesn't say 65, I think it says 60. That is what is intended by that statement. And if we look at the laws of the other countries, we'll see that attention is paid not just to their receiving financial support, but emotional support, recreational services. So that is really what is intended by that statement.
That statement and what I see in 1.4, paragraph 1.4 of the document is really validating the necessity for an elderly care legislation that is going to give a comprehensive framework for the protection of our senior citizens.
Agreed, agreed. Of course, the National Council, who I imagine that agency will come and make a presentation to you. They without being a creature of statute, do quite a bit, and I'm sure they will outline and that's policy rather than legislation.
Legislation,
so,
right.
Yes.
So we want to elevate that policy now to a legislative framework.
Having this interactive discussion, are we permitted to just keep our mics?
Here.
Those of us, the presenters, and those of us, myself and Member Morris, who are in the chamber. All right, okay. Yes. All right.
I just want to say to our colleagues online that we are monitoring the platform. So if you do wish to say something, please open your mic and just interrupt us. We're a small enough body that I think we can operate a little looser than normal. Go ahead, Ms. Wilkins.
Thank you, Chair. So, under healthcare, there is the National Health Fund Act. Enacted in 2003, the National Health Fund Act provides for assistance to be given to all residents, regardless of age, gender, health, or economic status. And it establishes a statutory body known as the National Health Fund. The assistance provided on the Act is limited, however, to specified diseases and specified medical conditions. So it's not all the medical needs that are met by this Act. The fund offers, though, a drug for the elderly program, which assists those over 60 for accessing essential drugs, but it's for specified chronic illnesses. And that's also the NHF card, which is available regardless of age, once you're an adult, again, limited to specified chronic illnesses. The National Insurance Scheme, they have a health card as well, the NI Gold, but this one is not limited to specified chronic illnesses. and it provides comprehensive medical coverage for all NIS pensioners. Let's look at welfare. The welfare of the elderly encompasses all aspects of their day-to-day needs, such as access to food, shelter, residential and recreational facilities. The National Council on the Elderly is a primary agency for promoting elderly welfare. Local authorities island-wide are also responsible for addressing needs of the homeless and indigent elderly in their respective parishes. There are 4 main categories of residential arrangements for the elderly. They live with relatives, live on their own independently without needing any assistance. Those in assisted living, which is an area that we have very little of in Jamaica, or supervised living. Again, we have very little of that in Jamaica. Living with relatives, independent living, and I guess supervised living, living in facilities established for them. I guess that is predominantly what we have in Jamaica. Very little assisted living.
Chair, in particular, where those, let's say supervised living, and supervised living I put in the context of nursing homes.
Homes, yes.
Are there any legislation that protects the elderly and with elderly care in this?
Right, so one of the laws that we're going to talk about is the Ministry of Health. The law that falls under their purview requires a registration of nursing homes.
Right.
And they do have guidelines for, yes,
okay,
for how to.
Okay, all right.
To
A little ahead of myself.
With residents of the homes. The Building Act and the National Building Code stipulate the requirements for buildings to be constructed so that egress and ingress can be afforded to a person with a disability. No specific reference is made to the elderly, however. It is presumed that the elderly's needs are not dissimilar to that of those, that's a repetition, that of those who are physically challenged. Section 3D provides that one of the objects of the Act is to enhance amenities in general and require the construction of buildings that provide sanitary facilities, easy access, adequate amenities for members of the public in general and persons with disabilities in particular. And we'll see that, yes.
Okay, save and except in instances where the Building Act makes provision for parking spaces, designated parking spaces. The designated parking spaces for persons with disabilities require that you have a sticker or some documentation to indicate that you have a disability. And I mean, unless the person, senior citizen, has a disability, the parking space would be available to the general population of our senior citizens. So there is an issue there that will have to be remedied.
Yes, I imagine the council, the council established under the Disabilities Act has that challenge in managing how public facilities open to the public ensure that the individuals with disabilities are in fact the ones who are able to access these buildings with ease.
Mm-hmm.
But the point we want to make here though is that I'm assuming there was thought that all we needed to say was persons with disabilities, and that there was no need to carve out
something for senior citizens.
Yes, and I think that may be a weakness in our laws as well.
Yeah.
this belief that the fact that you have made provision for the elderly means then that you have taken care of individuals who are past a particular age. Here we are at the Poor Relief Act. So the Poor Relief Act of 1886, note it's the year of enactment, still in force, very few amendments since its enactment. It's the primary legislation providing for social welfare to ensure relief is offered to the poor and destitute without injustice to the persons entitled to relief. Note, the poor and destitute. It does not make specific provision for senior citizens, but rather any person in need may seek relief. There are public residential facilities across the island providing for the needs of indigent adults of all ages, inclusive of 2 Golden Age homes in the corporate area. Individuals assisted under this law may receive housing and other services, particularly, that's a mistake there, particularly services that are required for the indigent and the homeless. The public residential facilities for the homeless are typically called infirmaries, and they're called almshouses in the Act. And that term has, over time, been associated with a very negative, extremely derogatory. And it perhaps it makes the case even stronger that this is a law that is in urgent need of reform. It is.
Because from as far back, somebody.
One moment, Senator Fraser-Binns.
Okay. As far back as in the early 2000s, the Poor Relief Act was supposed to be abolished, and the National Assistance Act replaced it as a part of the whole reform to the social protection architecture of the country. But there was some resistance, and
what was the one that was to replace it, you're saying, Dr. Morris?
A National Assistance Act.
Okay, thank you.
And there was some resistance, so we never followed through with that piece of legislation. But the more you have the discussion now, you see where there is need for reform or a repealing of that legislation and establish a brand new social legislation there.
Agreed. And the thing is, too, that so much of our legislative policy is ministry-driven, that even if an agency like let us say, the National Council would be anxious for that kind of reform to take place, for the reasons that we all agree are obvious. It has to be ministry-driven. And there it is. There are all kinds of dynamics that put one thing in front of, priorities are set by the ministries, and sometimes they just don't get to it. And, so perhaps having the ministry here would be helpful.
Well, the ministry has been invited, and I believe we'll be attending.
Yeah.
But it is what underscores the need for this committee, and through Senator Dr. Morris's motion, that would give urgent and targeted attention to the legislative framework to support the elderly in Jamaica. So, but do Ms. Wilkins, as you go through the presentation, point out to us where some of these failures have been so egregious. I mean, a Poor Relief Act of 1886, I want to hope and pray that any monetary amounts under that act have been reviewed over time. But I would suspect that it's probably just the monetary amounts under the Act that have been changed and probably not much else.
Right.
But this is a need generally for comprehensive legislative reform and updating of our laws throughout our entire law system. And I am an advocate that, we really do need to properly fund and support the Law Reform Commission, because the work that is there in front of them is quite a bit, and I don't think they're properly positioned to get that done. But that is something that, as you say, takes its position based on the priorities and exigencies of the day. We're coming out of that, though. We are coming out of that as a country. We're looking better.
Sorry, there was Senator Fraser Binns.
Yes, Senator Fraser Binns.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'm just going to ask you to forgive me. I'm having a little problem with my camera. I'm going to try and have that resolved.
Yes, Senator Fraser Binns, one moment, please. Can the IT help us with the sound, because she's coming out unclear? I think it's maybe it's too loud. One moment, Senator Fraser Binns, while we get that adjusted. I'm assuming that he's monitoring.
No problem.
Okay, can you try and speak now?
There's an echo as well.
Senator Fraser Binns, try and speak now.
Is this any better, Chair?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I was indicating, Chair, that I was having a little issue with my screen, but I have also been able to resolve that as well. I want to ask Ms. Wilkins, in terms of the Poor Relief Act, if there are any provisions in terms of the requirements for an elderly to be admitted to one of these homes. And I raise that because ever so often, Chair, in the news, you hear about abandoned elderly, especially in our hospitals, and what it means for the space, the limited space in our hospitals. And I am very curious to find out if there are some requirements that are provided in the Act or maybe regulations or some subsidiary law in terms of who can be admitted to these homes. And secondly, whether or not there is a phasing out in terms of, so you go into these homes because perhaps your family is in some hardship, but is it that there is a halfway home that is provided by the government after a period of time?
Senator, we don't have that kind of detail. I'm thinking that when the ministry representatives come before this committee, they will provide that detail that you require. However, based on the law, an elderly person who is in need is eligible to receive relief under this act. It may well be a question of resources versus numbers. And we do see from time to time in the news of efforts to upgrade the facilities in the parishes. So there may well be a challenge, but I think the ministry would speak to that challenge much more effectively than I could. So I could only say that the law permits an elderly person in need to receive assistance under the Poor Relief Act.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Gale, you wanted to? Okay. Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Wilkins.
So these are two charities which they're on the books. Again, this is something the ministry would be able to speak to. But they were established in the 19th century for the parish of St. Mary, both of them. For and again, it is, and see the terminology again, the poorhouse, to establish poorhouses in the parish of St. Mary and to assist the respectable poor of the parish. No carve out for the elderly again, but an elderly person who is poor would be able to receive assistance under these, the Grace Charity and the Lawson Gifford Charity. They are both provided for in statute, and those laws have not been repealed. So they may very well have been rolled into other programs, but yes.
You know, it's of note because we would have seen, in my time here, we would have seen a few of these charity acts coming to Parliament, new ones. But I've never seen one coming proposing an amendment.
That's it.
And, you know, it tells us that we would have these specific provisions in law in the types of charity acts that have never been reviewed. I don't want to ask too much of you because the information that you have presented is voluminous in nature, and we commend you for that. But one of the things that I would request, and just for our information, to assist us, is an indication over these pieces of legislations when there has been any amendment to them,
Okay.
or the last amendments.
Okay. We
Right.
can
Yeah.
provide that, and we will provide it to the
Yeah.
clerk.
Please.
You know, I'm very much familiar with the Grace Charity. I'm not familiar with the latter that you mentioned,
The Lawson Gifford.
Lawson Gifford.
That's the St. Mary connection.
Yes, yes. But both of them, I think, are in St. Mary.
Yes.
But you know, I must say that the Grace Charity is on a wonderful piece of property overlooking the Cabarita Island in Port Maria. And no, in Port Maria, just on the outskirts of the town. And I mean, when I visited it some years ago, it was the location of some of those cannons that they used to use back in the days to defend the port of Port Maria. But I don't know what has happened with the facility now, because, you know, it is a property that was designated to assist elderly persons, and I don't know if that is the case right now, and if the property is being maintained. It falls under the aegis of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, and I think during the discussion, Madam Chair, we can find out from the ministry what is the situation with those properties.
Yes, very well. I would myself would want to know. I'm sure the other members are interested as well. Well, we can ask the questions when they come before us, but I too would want to know, Senator Morris, what, you know, a law obviously was passed to facilitate the objects of a trust, and it would be interesting to me to see how that dynamic, why that dynamic was conceived of at the time. It might have been we didn't have a Trust Act in place at the time. And so I have questions in my mind just from a legislative perspective as to whether, you know, how does that act work now that we do have an act dealing with trusts, and what's the dynamic between the two? But ultimately, what is the underground reality of the Grace Charity, and are the objects of the trust
Being met.
still being met today? So we can put those questions in particular, Madam Clerk, to the Ministry of Labor so that they can have that in their mind for a response.
Local government, Chair, not labor.
This is managed by local government.
Local government.
Yes, okay. Thank you for that correction.
So, but I mean, but the Grace Charity, as I said, it was under the aegis of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security because it was ministerially assigned to me as Minister of State.
Okay. Well, that may have changed as you know, different prime ministers organize their cabinets differently.
Yes, a long time.
Yes.
I hear you.
Go ahead, Ms. Wilkins. Thank you.
Okay. The Maintenance Act imposes a statutory duty on adult children to maintain parents and grandparents. The qualifying factor is that the parent or grandparent must be in need of maintenance because of inability to work and being unable to provide for themselves due to advanced age, physical or mental infirmity. And this is irrespective, well, in some cases it may be irrespective of the parents or grandparents' age if the issue is a physical or mental infirmity. The Act does not specify the age at which the responsibility is invoked.
Does the Act specify a penalty?
It doesn't.
Okay.
Let me get to that. So Section 10 places the obligation on an individual to maintain their parent and grandparent who are in need of maintenance due to age, physical or mental infirmity or disability. Section 11 empowers the court to grant an order for maintenance of a dependent, and that can be an elderly parent or grandparent. In Section 17, the court may, in the case of a dependent who is receiving a pension, make an attachment order. All right, before I get to the attachment order, so let us say that the adult child or the adult is not maintaining their parent or grandparent, and you're trying to enforce that. The best that you can do is get an order from the court. And there are consequences for disobeying the court's order in the law. So there is some measure of enforcement, but of course it requires the cost and time associated with approaching the court for the remedy. Yeah.
So the Act is not age specific. However,
No.
under Section 10, the Maintenance Act places the obligation on a person to maintain their parents and grandparents.
Chairman, we have lost signal on our end.
I'm sorry. You have lost
Signal.
I was wondering if they're able to hear us still.
We're able to hear you. You're not able to hear us.
Oh, now you can
But
hear.
we're able to hear you. That's why we're responding.
Are you hearing are you seeing the presentation?
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
No, I don't know if it's the presentation. I only have the Maintenance Act slide up. That's what I see.
That's what's on the screen.
I'm not having
Okay,
it.
well, I would like to make a comment if that's good now.
One
Dr.
second,
Langmore,
Senator
before you
Long.
go ahead, can you
Senator
hear me?
Longmore.
Allow her to go ahead, Chair.
1 second, Senator Longmore. I'm trying to just be clear that both of you are fully seeing the presentation and hearing that's what's happening in the room. Senator Fraser-Binns?
Chairman,
It's going in and out.
Okay, can we just ask IT just to give some attention to that? Go ahead, Senator Longmore.
Hello, that's me. Hello.
Yes, Senator Longmore. Go ahead.
Yes,
Senator
thank
Gale
you.
is yielding.
Oh, so I wanted to ask, good morning again. I wanted to ask with respect to these provisions here and the situation of what was described before by Senator Fraser-Binns, which, I mean, I actually was going to comment on it, but I said let me wait until, because I know the Ministry of Health and perhaps Labor and Social Security is where we would probably get the specific answers. But does this Maintenance Act provision for provide for that security blanket for persons who would be so abandoned, or usually in our health systems or elsewhere? Is it that we can act on it, quote unquote, in those settings?
Meaning,
Hello?
meaning, you'd bring an application to the court on behalf of the elderly individual, and you would be asking for an order to be made so that
yes,
their adult issue would be compelled. Yes.
And perhaps more what I want to find out, which again probably would be the Ministry of Health, is what authority would a hospital or the hospital administration have in enforcing this or seeking to enforce this, or mechanisms for such?
Well, I'm not sure about the hospital, because Section 17 has a provision which would assist in the case of a facility for the elderly where the court can be approached for where the elderly is receiving a pension. The court can be approached to make an attachment order so that a portion of that pension can be paid to the person taking care of them. But the hospital wouldn't, I don't think, I'm not thinking that it would apply in the case of a hospital.
Well, this is herein lies one of the issues, because we have this situation not just for elderly, but oftentimes persons with the disability in the form of a mental illness. And so I'm curious to hear, but I will wait until the necessary, the persons who are more relevant to the specific question probably be present for us to explore it, because it is certainly something that needs to be remedied, I think.
Agreed, but you know, a lot will depend on the capacity of their children. In some cases,
so, yes, but what you're basically indicating that a child or a person is almost obliged to see to care of parent or grandparent.
Yes, there's a statutory duty to do it.
Right. So we oftentimes have those situations where parent or grandparent is abandoned. And speaking from that perspective, where this is something that I encounter on a regular basis, it's almost like us in the health system. We feel as if we have no option but to provide whatever resources we can with no remit. So I'll be curious to find out. But I know I'll have to wait until the Ministry of Health probably comes in and we go from there.
Chairman, may I ask a question at a convenient time?
Go ahead, Senator Fraser-Binns.
Thank you. Ms. Wilkins, I'm not sure if you have, but if you don't, if you can provide for us the number of cases that have gone before the courts. And I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm very curious to find out how often this particular piece of legislation has been used, particularly in relation to our elderly.
That is something that we will try to obtain as much of that information as is possible, because you know, right, we have parish courts throughout the island, and it may not be possible to get an island-wide, but there is a program for data to be captured of the proceedings before the court. So I will see if that information is available.
That might be actually, Ms. Wilkins, that information might actually be available through the court administration services. And so, Senator Fraser-Binns, we can collate some questions and put it to them. We might actually want to hear from that division later on. But I would say let us go through the overview. We'll see what kinds of information the senators are interested in getting in addition to what they're hearing that would come from the court administration services, and then issue them an invitation as well. I don't recall them being in our first list of specially invited entities, but we can certainly invite them and put specific questions to them.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Right.
Senator Gale.
So I just wanted to see clarity on this, and I'm not looking on the act itself, but the Maintenance Act imposes a statutory obligation or duty on other adult children to maintain their parents and grandparents. And in, you know, in these day and age, grandparents can come from various ages, even below 50. But it says the act is not age specific.
No.
But then when you go to section 10, the Maintenance Act also places the obligation on a person to maintain their parents and grandparents who are in need and maintenance due to age. Not age specific,
No.
that was said previously, but in section 10 now the obligation is based on age. We can understand physical and mental infirmity or disability because that's evidence-based. Is this a gap?
I would agree with you that it is. I think it should provide more detail
Right.
about that.
Okay. So this is something, well...
But depending on the
where
rule
we're going.
of interpretation that you use, you could associate the words together to construe. But I agree, it should be specific or some...
You see, it
range,
exposes an adult child who might be charged for not pursuing the duty to escape it because it's not age related. What age do I start? I can deal with the physical and mental infirmity or the disability because that's evidence-based.
But the need for maintenance
Yes.
has to be associated. That is the background. So the need for maintenance due to age
Yes.
does provide some limitation.
Right. Well,
But agreed.
I would want
to make
to
it clearer.
offer,
I agree.
Yeah, I would
It
want to
should.
offer in the review that we're related to some specific in terms
I
of
agree.
age, just
It
to
would be much.
on the
Would
clear
make
side.
it, yes, beyond. But imagine if you approach the court would be mindful due to need of maintenance due to age. The court would be thinking, hold on now, you know, if age is the basis, at what point does an individual need assistance with maintenance? At what age? Yeah. But I agree. Makes it clearer to put it in the law. So this is a law that deals with many things, but we thought we should mention it, that there is a Charities Act, and it provides for the registration of charitable organizations and that pursue a charitable purpose. And among the charitable purpose is the relief of persons in need because of advanced age. That is an accepted charitable purpose. We don't say more. This is the act I mentioned earlier, the Nursing Homes Registration Act. And many nursing homes provide long-term care for elderly individuals who are unable to manage their affairs, unable to look after their daily needs. These facilities are required to be registered under the Nursing Homes Registration Act, which falls within the purview of the Ministry of Health. The facilities covered by the Act include residential care institutions for senior citizens, including nursing homes, adult daycare centers, convalescent homes, and palliative, I've never been able to pronounce that word, palliative services. The Act applies generally to anyone suffering any sickness, injury, or infirmity and is resident in a home falling within those categories. And it is the Ministry of Health that provides the guidelines for operators of these homes. And those guidelines take into account the unique needs of the senior citizens. The Disabilities Act. The Disabilities Act is listed among the list of policies and strategic documents in the National Policy for Senior Citizens that apply to the elderly. The Act does not make specific provision for an elderly person who has a disability. There's no breakout based on age in the Disabilities Act. If it is intended that the act should apply to the elderly generally, it is recommended that the act is amended to outline the needs of the elderly as a discrete objective of the act. And that is if the policy decision is to look at that act again, because there is a thinking though that age is not a disability, and I have some uncomfortableness about the Disabilities Act being listed as in the yes, and as we discuss later on when we're talking about the Madrid Plan of Action, the report that Jamaica prepared on our progress towards implementation said that for the legislative framework, what we have achieved is then bringing into force of the Disabilities Act. And so the association of the Disabilities Act with aging is, I'm thinking, one which may not be the most appropriate. I think we can agree that there are limitations, the provisions for individuals with the limitations that come with a disability. An elderly person may have those limitations as well. So it's not that they're completely different, but I don't think an elderly person who has may not have a physical disability, I don't think we should treat that person in the category that we treat with disability.
So when you speak of old age or reaching a particular age, and it suggests infirmity, because at that stage there is a sense of weakness, both physically and mentally. So you might not reach a stage of being disabled, but you are not at the strength that you are both physically and mentally. And so maybe the category of you being placed under infirmity, maybe treating with that. And notice again that in the nursing homes, it speaks to suffering any sickness, injury, or infirmity, and its residents in a home falling within these categories. Again, this does speak to age.
No.
I don't know. And that is something that, we have to take this age thing into consideration. But I understand your point that we have to broaden it or get a clearer understanding in how we characterize those who are disabled in nature.
Yes, member, that is what I'm thinking, that the association as it is now it's not consistent with seeking to pursue programs that inure to achieving healthy aging.
Right. Just before I permit me, my concern, is for those who may provide the support and assistance. When they examine, they may inform themselves or come to the opinion that you don't really need it, because you don't fall under the level of disability or the extent of weakness to treat you as for infirmity. So there are some gaps there, and allows for the risk of exposure for someone to determine on their own opinion that you can't qualify for the support.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah, Fly.
All right. So, Madam Chair, oftentimes people confuse physical disability to interpret it as a generic term for disability. Physical disability is a specific category of disability that can cause from different infirmities. For example, It can cause through diabetes. It can cause through a stroke or something like that. But physical disability is a specific category of disability. There are 8 major categories of disability. And what the definition in terms of the Disability Act, which never reflected in completeness the definition in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, speaks to a long-term physical, mental, or sensory impairment. And the sensory impairment captures things like hearing impairment, or those who are blind or have some form of speech disability. But what I believe, Madam Chair, we have to understand that all of these categories of disability can impact on an elderly person, because an elderly person can have a hearing impairment. The elderly person can have a sight impairment, can have a mental impairment, which things like dementia and Alzheimer's would fall under mental impairment, you know. So there needs to be a greater understanding of all of these different types of disability and how it impacts on the elderly.
We remember, Senator Morris, we had invited Mona Aging and Wellness.
Yes.
And I suspect they will give us some insight into some of those very points that you're raising.
Yes, and I look forward to that, especially when Prof. Shearer comes.
Yes. Thank you. Ms. Wilkins. Touch your mic again for me, please, Ms. Wilkins. There you go.
The National Council for Senior Citizens. So the National Council for Senior Citizens was established more than 45 years ago as a department in the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. It is not established by statute. But it works in collaboration with local and international organizations and other stakeholders to implement the national policy for senior citizens through programs and initiatives on behalf of all persons 60 years and older. The Council has expressed its policy intent within the context of the National 2030 goals as senior citizens live and participate actively in a society that guarantees their rights, promotes their responsibilities, recognizes their capabilities and contributions, and facilitates their enjoyment of a life of fulfillment, health, and security. It is an extremely appropriate goal that the Council has set out. And perhaps it's a goal that this committee will assist in getting us closer to by way of legislation. So we're looking at the international conventions now. There's the Inter-American Convention on Protecting the Human Rights of Older Persons. So in 2015, the Inter-American Convention on Protecting the Human Rights of Older Persons.
Ms. Wilkins, I'm so sorry, my question is delayed. Can I just take you back to just the discussion about the National Council for Senior Citizens? And I just want to register a question that I would have. When you look at the legislation in various jurisdictions, whether or not there is legislative grounding for a body similar to National Council for Senior Citizens in those jurisdictions. I would be interested to see what that looks like.
We actually have cited about 2 or 3 of such laws.
Right. Yes, because I do recall, and just to remind members, that we did do a matrix of the committee team did do a matrix of the issues that were raised by the various senators who had contributed to the debate on the motion. And so you will recall that one of the things that I had raised with the Senate at the time was the concept of having an elder care advocate similar to the children's advocate, or an elderly advocate similar to the children's advocate. There are different mechanisms for ensuring that there is a body responsible for ensuring the rights of the elderly, and that the various laws in relation to the elderly are upheld. And it may very well be that that happens in other jurisdictions through something similar to the National Council, as opposed to what I proposed as an elderly advocate. But I look forward to the learning on that.
Sorry, that reminds me, we can get them, I don't want to say that on It reminds me that if we could get the matrix in a paper-based form to be part of our package.
Okay, you didn't get it in a paper-based form? Okay, all right. Very well. Go ahead, Mr.
Okay, so the Inter-American Convention, Jamaica is not a signatory to the convention. However, the purpose of the convention is aligned with the objectives set out in our national policy on aging. So we thought it would be useful to include it, and it is, the full text of the convention is included in the document, the larger document. The purpose of the convention is to promote, protect, and ensure the recognition and full enjoyment and exercise on an equal basis of all human rights and fundamental freedoms of older persons in order to contribute to their full inclusion, integration, and participation in society. That is so. The United Nations principles for older persons. And what we've noticed is that all the countries that we have looked at, regardless of whether or not they've enacted specific legislation, seem to be guided by these United Nations principles in the development of their policy on their older citizens. So the global trend for individuals to live longer has prompted countries to develop policies to ensure that the needs of the ever-increasing older population are met. In that regard, the United Nations General Assembly in 1991 developed guiding principles for nation-states to adopt in the development of national policy and ultimately legislation on the elderly. The principles speak to independence, participation, care, self-fulfillment, dignity. And also the full text of the principles is included in the appendix to your document. The next significant international document is the Madrid Plan of Action on Aging. The Madrid Plan of Action is derived from that meeting where these principles were enunciated and adopted. So this plan is a plan, each country indicating how it is that they will bring these principles into their legislation. What are they going to do to ensure that these principles are adopted in their countries? So we note that the Madrid Plan of Action of Aging is referred to throughout the document generated by the National Council on Aging. So we have assumed then that Jamaica intends to fully adopt the UN principles and is seeking to, and we have been reporting on our progress. Our progress has largely been social programs and not very much on legislation. So the Madrid Plan of Action on Aging, adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2002, and noted that Jamaica was represented at this meeting, is the first global agreement which recognizes older people as contributors to the development of their societies and which commits governments to including aging in all social and economic development policies, including poverty reduction programs. the development of Jamaica's national policy on aging has been guided largely by the Madrid Plan of Action on Aging. In 2003, at a regional intergovernmental conference in Santiago, Chile, the regional strategy for the implementation in Latin America and the Caribbean of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging was adopted. And again, Jamaica was a participant. So we're now looking at laws of other countries, and we're starting with Sri Lanka. The Protection of the Rights of Elders Act. This was passed in 2000 and provided for the establishment of a National Council for Elders. This is in keeping with the question that you had asked, Chair, about... Oh.
Sorry, Senator Morris, just turn off your mic. Yes.
Oh, no, what was happening, Madam Chair, is that I was asking if there was any mention of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, because that would also capture senior citizens with disabilities as well.
Okay. No, Senator, we actually did not include that convention. Again, because of the thinking that there are discrete conventions treating with the rights of the elderly, and that those conventions speak to all aspects. Not that you're incorrect about the Convention on Disabilities.
There is some overlap in
Yeah, because there is an intersectionality with disability and
yes,
aging.
There is.
And so, it keeps on coming up in these discourse. Yeah.
Agreed. So in the case of Sri Lanka, the Act established a National Council for Elders, which would be on all fours with our National Council for the Elderly. The long title, an act to provide for the establishment of a National Council of Elders for the promotion and protection of the welfare and rights of elders. The act places a statutory duty on children to not willfully neglect their parents who have passed the age of 60 and to look after their needs. A national secretariat is established by the act, charged to assist the council in the discharge of its functions and for the registration of elders by the council. And that is an interesting point, the registration of the elderly. And a country, their population is larger than ours, so maybe it's something we should consider as well. A responsibility is also placed on the state to provide for the housing needs of elders, and liability, restrictions, or conditions may be placed on the elder in respect of their access to any building, place, or institution that any other person has access. That sentence may not be as clear as it should be. I think it is on, it's not that it's placed on the elder, it's placed on the persons who operate the facility at that building, the place, or the institution. They will face liability and restriction for not ensuring that the elder have access that any other person has. Most importantly, the Act establishes a Welfare of Elders Fund to which government funds as well as bequests and grants can be paid. An elder who is in need of maintenance support may apply to a board for an order that one or more of his children or an approved person or organization pay him a monthly allowance. Then that's just a quick summary of that Act.
Ms. Wilkins, I'm not sure if you had mentioned it, but the statutory duty to not neglect. What does the penalty for that breach of that provision look like?
Did we note the penalty? Let me see. We may not have noted the penalty.
You know, I asked this question because the statutory duty to maintain children is one that I think as a nation, everybody is on board with. I've never heard a Jamaican citizen suggest that they should not have a duty to care for children. The duty to care for our elderly folk, parents and grandparents, though, can sometimes be controversial from a social perspective because people raise issues like the lack of care that they may have received from that parent or grandparent, and therefore for the state to enforce a duty for them to care for a parent or grandparent who might have been neglectful of them is something that I think our people, some of our people may grapple with.
Yeah.
And this is a real world we live in, you know? So,
yeah.
So when we come to making proposals in this area, I'm just putting it out to the committee members. I think these are some of the very real issues we'll have to confront.
Contemplate, and we'll probably have to look at how it's treated in other jurisdictions.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Ms. Wilkins. Thank you.
All right. We're checking to see if there's a penalty.
Madam Chair, I'm going to have to take my exit because today, as I pointed out, is my lecture days.
Yes,
And
Senator Morris,
so,
we're going to have to perhaps shift a day. Yes. Senator Morris, you and I will have some discussion to see if we can't find a better day.
Yeah.
Okay?
All right. Okay then.
Very well. Thank you so much.
But very interesting presentation.
Thank you,
How
Senator.
long we keep you here?
Thank you, Senator.
Continue, Ms. Wilkins.
Okay, we're checking on the offense, but in the meantime, for India, the Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act of 2007 places a duty on children or relatives to maintain a senior citizen who is unable to maintain himself. A mechanism is provided for a senior citizen, defined as a citizen who is 60 years old or above or older, to apply to a tribunal for a monthly allowance to be paid by his children. The Act also provides for the establishment of old age homes by the state, and each home should be able to accommodate a minimum of 150 senior citizens who are indigent. Provision is also made for state-funded sensitization sessions to be delivered to public sector employees, and a comprehensive action plan for protecting the life and property of senior citizens is required to be developed. Under the Act, the state has responsibility to ensure that medical facilities provide specifically for senior citizens as far as possible. So the Act mandates that a specific ward should be in public hospitals that are for the elderly specifically. It goes on to say that. Whoever has responsibility to provide care and protection of a senior citizen and leaves with the intention of abandoning the senior citizen, shall be punishable with imprisonment for up to 3 months or a fine or both. So this is consistent with the question that Senator Longmore would have made. So in the case of India, they have put a provision in for the abandonment of the senior citizen that you are required to take care of.
Okay.
Noted.
That's going to be a very interesting dynamic were we to have something similar here, because we have so many senior citizens whose children are all living outside of the jurisdiction, who no longer are domiciled in Jamaica. So it is going to be, that's an interesting discussion for us to have later on. Senator Gale, allow me to hear Senator Longmore, I think, was trying to say something.
No, I just recognize what was just indicated for Mexico. Thank you.
Yes.
India.
India, my bad, sorry.
Go ahead, Senator Gale.
This one, this one is going to be interesting because the abandonment.
Senator Gale, can you use another mic? That mic sounds like that's left you.
All of a sudden,
Oh, hold on. Okay, let's go. Let's go again, Senator Gill.
Right. So the abandonment in this case can be an abandonment of the domiciled home where the individual may be.
Yeah.
But then Chair would have spoken about the abandonment in an institution where they have abandoned individuals that may have been either in the infirmary, the hospital.
Yes, Senator Longmore.
Senator Longmore, sorry. Senator Longmore. So if we were to consider looking at this, then we may have to consider an expansion of determining that abandonment.
yes.
Yeah?
Because India casts it very widely, though, you know.
Yes.
Very, very
Yes.
widely.
But I want to ask you, because in these references to the various countries, you would have extrapolated specifics of the legislations, of these legislations.
Yes.
Right. Are you pointing us by suggestion that we should consider these specifics as priorities?
Well, I think there's a hyperlink there to the Act, so you could, they give you an opportunity to look at it, but we're thinking, having regard to the concerns
Yes.
of this committee, we're thinking that these are elements of these laws that would be of particular interest.
Okay. When I go around to your gap analysis, I'm going to ask you some
Yes.
other questions.
All right, okay. But because what most of the law would be is details about how the entity created must carry out its work, and so I didn't think that it was necessary. So, but we made sure to provide a link to the legislation, so you could look at it.
Ms.
Chairman,
Williams, if I
if I
could
may?
hear Senator Fraser Binns.
Thank you, Chairman. This reference stands for the example of India because you said something that really grabbed my attention. But before I go to that, I want to just clarify the provision of a special ward for the elderly. Is this in public hospitals or is it in all hospitals?
In public hospitals.
Okay, and do you know if in India these hospitals are fully funded by the government, like say KPH, or is it a hybrid like UE? Do you know?
That's an important point, but no, that is something that we will look at. At this point, we don't have that information, but I agree that that would be an important bit of information. So we have a full appreciation as to the impact that this provision in the law would have. So we make a note of that as well.
Thank you. And the other thing, and this is what piqued my interest when we spoke about the abandonment, because we know that in the Child Care and Protection Act, we have provisions, for example, of kids who are in need of care and protection. And then there's a whole thing about abandonment of children. But for us, and this is more of a conversation, Chair, that we will have to have later on, but because of how our family system is set up in Jamaica, what you find in a number of instances is that the biological child or grandchild really doesn't care or is not the first person to care for the elderly. Sometimes it's a neighbor, sometimes it's somebody who you help along the way. And in considering the kind of approach that we would take, we'll have to give due consideration just to how it is set up. Because we don't want to create a system, for example, where nobody wants to look after an elderly because they're afraid that the very fact that they have taken an elderly in and they're looking after the elderly, that they could be held liable for the ongoing care and protection of that senior citizen, particularly when they are not related by blood. So it's something that I find very interesting, but of course, given our own situation in Jamaica, I think as we continue the discussion to something that we have to look at, and I see Senator Longmore just put a note here, Chair, you may be losing your quorum very soon. So I'll stop right there.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Chair.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to point out that I think this is the reason that they've established a tribunal, and it is a tribunal that I don't know.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's a tribunal that determines the amount that is to be paid, and I imagine the responsibility has to be established also by virtue of whether you're a relative or you're a child of the senior citizen. So when it says whoever has responsibility, this would be the person who would have been identified by the tribunal as the person required to look after the senior citizen. That's it. And if that person abandons, well, they say if they leave with the intention of abandoning that senior citizen, then the consequences flow.
So not to detain, so it would be more like somebody who would have gotten an order, say either under the Mental Health Act or under the legal guardianship. So it would be more somebody like that, and then that person having been given the responsibility in the law to take care of this senior citizen, then abandons the person, correct?
Yes, that would be an excellent term.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
This leaves with the intention, though, have to be tied up a bit. Because someone can say, well, I never intended. I had to leave for particular reasons. Yeah? So this leave with the intention, if we're considering.
We know that a lot of times, in most of our laws prescribing offenses, we have a mental element, a willfulness. So that's their way of saying that you willfully they abandon this person. So it gives them an opportunity to say, you know, I never intended that to abandon, I just left temporarily, but you know, it gives them an opportunity to explain. So it's not strict liability.
Like our parent left go to the shop and fire burned down the house of the child with the child.
Yes, that was not an abandonment. All right, so for Pakistan, it's the Islamabad Capital Territory Senior Citizens Act. And as we will see in most of the laws, a senior citizen is defined as a person who has attained 60 years or over. This act establishes the Senior Citizens Council as a body corporate with responsibility inter alia to conduct research and compile data on the aging population to educate senior citizens about life changes. The applications may be made for maintenance, but you apply to the council. The senior citizen that needs maintenance must apply to the council and show that they are unable to maintain themselves. The Act also establishes a senior citizens fund. You notice in the same case of India that established, of Sri Lanka, that established a senior citizens fund to which an allocation is made by government as well as donations and contributions by private individuals. It may be a model that may be well worth considering in our case. A grievance committee is maintained by the council in order to hear grievances of senior citizens. Abandonment of a senior citizen by a person responsible for their care and protection incurs liability punishable by a fine. Similarly, refusal to obey the direction by the council to care for a senior citizen after 15 days notice has been given to comply is liable to a fine.
Can I just ask whether or not, do we have anything in our jurisdiction like the Senior Citizens Fund that establishes a fund that is established by the state to which private entities can make contributions?
I have no, I don't.
Any area? No?
I don't. The minister, or maybe the accountant general will be the best person to answer that question. But I'm not aware of one.
Okay, thank you.
South Africa, they enacted the Older Persons Act in 2006, and the preamble to the act indicates that it is enacted in keeping with the constitutional right to respect human dignity and the obligation of the state to create an enabling environment for the rights enshrined in the Constitution to be respected, protected, and fulfilled. An older person is defined as a person who, in the case of a male, has attained 65 years of age, and in the case of a female, has attained 60 years of age. The Act mandates all organs of the state to respect, protect, and promote the rights of older persons, and enunciates the general principles of respect, fair treatment, and protection of older persons. Residential facilities are regulated under the Act, and where more than 10 older persons reside in a facility, a residence committee for the facility is required to be established, and an older person is required to be a member of that committee so that they're involved in the running of the facility. It is an offense to abuse an older person, and abuse is widely construed to include physical, sexual, psychological, and economic abuse. This is something also that we could consider providing for. A register of persons convicted of the abuse of older persons is mandated to be kept by the minister, and such a person is barred from being the operator of or employee in a residential facility for older persons. The Act sets out guiding principles for the environment within which services are provided to older persons and specifies community-based programs that are to be conducted by government to facilitate the older person remaining in their own community and receiving registered economic empowerment, educational, medical, and recreational services and programs. Caregivers who provide home care to older persons are required to be registered and must abide by a code of conduct. A caregiver who does not comply is guilty of an offense. The United Kingdom, well, they passed the Care Act in 2014. It's quite large and it's quite comprehensive. But the important point here is that it does not provide specifically for senior citizens. It provides for all citizens, because the policy position is that everyone is on an equal footing and should receive equal treatment. So this law provides for care to be given to anyone who needs care. It doesn't break it out, but very extensive provisions are there for local authorities to know the residents in their respective area who are in need of care, and to monitor those individuals and to ensure that those individuals receive the care that they need. So the focus is, as I said, is on the society as a whole. And each age category receives attention that is commensurate with their generational needs. Australia passed the Aged Care Act in 2024, and it comes into force in July 1 of 2025. It is massive in its coverage. I guess commensurate with the size of the country, but I don't think they left anything out. It is a very complicated and comprehensive law to ensure that the aged receive care in this act. It modernizes and consolidates the law in this area and repeals previously enacted laws to bring the care of the aged under one piece of legislation. It is comprehensive in its scope and places the promotion of the rights and interests of the aged as paramount. The objectives of the Act include ensuring that aged individuals are free from mistreatment, neglect, and harm. It provides a forward-looking aged care system that is designed to uphold the rights of individuals under the Statement of Rights and assist individuals accessing funded aged care services to live active, self-determined, and meaningful lives. The Act establishes an Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission, which includes the post of a Complaints Commissioner as an independent office within the Commission. It is intended to provide a mechanism for complaints to be heard objectively, even where the complaint is against the work of the Commission.
I like this part of this particular legislation that gives the rise to the complaint being submitted somewhere, even a complaint that could come from a neighbor who knows.
That's right.
The complaint could come from the person's feeling the issue, being the elderly, or the complaint can come from anywhere. But I'm encouraged by this, the establishment of this area or unit to treat with it, because sometimes they go through and you'll never know until the last, when, you know, maybe death. But I'm proposing that we examine this as a serious consideration.
Senator Gale, we have precedents for that already, because we see that provision in the Child Care and Protection Act, which mandates, it has two categories. One where it mandates anyone with information about a child being neglected, abused, or is likely to be abused to make a complaint about that. So we do have a precedent that we can look at, and I think this is so important because a lot of elderly, particularly those with diminished mental capacity, often suffer in silence, and persons know, but they're also afraid of saying anything. So I too would commend this to our committee for serious consideration.
Thank you.
So an aged care service list is to be provided in regulations, and those services are the services that are required to be delivered in approved residential homes or in the individual's home or community where they access services. An individual aged 65 or older, they would apply to a system governor. That's the title of that office, and that is the individual now who determines the needs of this individual. They undergo a needs assessment, and based on those needs, arrangements for the needs to be met are developed. So this is another point where it's personalizing the individual needs. So you ensure that what I need may be different from somebody else. So you're able to localize what are the most critical areas of need. Okay, so the gap analysis. Those are the laws that we selected, but there are many more. But I think we can agree that the point is that these are issues that are taken care of in legislation, the most recent being that of Australia. There is no single piece of legislation that provides for the welfare of the elderly in Jamaica. The Constitution specifically references the rights of the child, but no such reference is made for the elderly. The Maintenance Act is the only law that places a responsibility on an adult to maintain their parent or grandparent. However, the parent or grandparent must need maintenance because of inability to work and being unable to provide for themselves due to advanced age, physical, or mental infirmity, irrespective of their age. It is important to note that the context within which maintain is used in respect of their economic needs. Well, economic and health needs. It is recommended an amendment be made to the Act to expand the provisions of Section 10 to place a greater responsibility on younger adults to provide for the holistic care of their elderly parents. Additionally, there are no sanctions or other enforcement measures for failing to carry out the responsibility, save for the maintenance order which was previously mentioned. Jamaica's legislative framework does not provide for the holistic care of the elderly. While some of the services aimed at addressing the physical needs of the elderly are being delivered, the educational, mental, and emotional needs require attention. The services provided by the National Council for the Elderly are not mandated in legislation. The adoption of the Madrid Plan of Action, though widely accepted as a benchmark for developing policy on elder care, is not obligatory, although it is noted that the Council is guided by its provisions. As it is not a creature of statute, the National Council's functions are not supported by enforcement measures, such as inspection of elderly care facilities and private homes where elderly individuals are cared for, with a view to ensuring that the care being given is appropriate. As such, there is no power to sanction the willful neglect of an elderly person. The 2022 report by the GOJ on the national policy against the policy for the implementation of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging indicated progress made in respect of the legislative framework was the revised Plan of Action tabled in 2021 and the Disabilities Act, which came into effect in 2022. Legislatively, therefore, very little progress has been made. The difficulty to obtain quantitative and qualitative data on the impact of crime, violence, cost of food prices, housing, cost of health services on the elderly population negatively impacts the legislative policy development. And this may be something that we may need to have a special carve out. I think starting can be. This is something we could discuss with them.
Yes.
Breaking out the data.
They so indicated when they were.
Yes, so that it can guide the committee in its consideration. There is no law similar to the Child Care and Protection Act and the Children Guardianship and Custody Act that applies to adults. Such a law would serve to provide a cohesive framework for the court to oversee the appointment and conduct of a guardian or trustee over an older adult's personal affairs where that adult is deemed unfit. The Adult Guardianship and Trusteeship Act of Alberta, Canada is a very good example. Under that law, provision is made for the appointment of one or two persons to manage the person's affairs, which includes their health care, their living arrangements, and persons with whom they may associate, their participation in social activities, their employment, participation, in education and vocational training. And this is the extent of our presentation. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wilkins, and your colleagues at the Legal Reform Department, Ms. Roden, for your contribution as well to this presentation. We have a pretty hefty document to go through, and we thank you for providing this and for providing copies of the acts that you have suggested, maybe good examples that we could look at. I don't know if the committee members have any other questions. Yes, Senator Gill.
just for clarity, in the South Africa legislation, you highlighted the question of the register of persons. And I can understand a registrar of those committing a sexual offense.
Yes.
And how that works. But in this situation, those convicted of abuse of older persons, I just wanted to understand how that will work in our situation, because if you're convicted, yes, you're part of a registrar, but what will that registration do?
It appears that the policy intent is to ensure that that individual is not permitted to be in charge of or employed in any facility for the elderly.
Okay.
Having regard to your past conduct.
Right. Okay. So particular emphasis would have been placed on if you were employed in an institution.
Yes.
Yeah. Ms. Wilkins, Mrs. Roden, I thank you for this, because it's very, very informative to guide this committee.
Thank you, Senator.
But one of the concerns I'm having now is, you know, we make our laws sometimes triggered by conventions and the conversions of conventions into law. A lot of these conventions have been more placed in policies, and maybe placed in policies because when you place them in legislations, the question of maintenance of the legislation and enforcement is going to be critical. When you place them in policies, you can control how the policies is being pursued. Yeah?
Yes.
I would like to understand, I know you have taken us into some of the areas where you have recommended we examine, but maybe if you have the time permitted outside of this sitting, are there any other areas in conventions that you think maybe we can look at as priorities, yeah,
Okay.
in terms of the convergence between conventions into legislation when we are going to contemplate this holistic Elderly Care Act, yeah? And I think it's important because this is one opportunity that we're going to have to make this holistic piece of legislation. The second thing is that, Chair, we have those pieces of other legislations that we may need to seek to import into this holistic legislation. So we may need to have a greater understanding of those that we may need to import to make it into this piece of legislation. But not for you. But maybe we need to examine now, coming out of these conventions that have been recommended as action plans by the various agencies or ministries, I would like to be able to appreciate what would have been recommended as actionable and what would have met as targets. Because oftentimes, we make these recommendations as part of actions, but we never really meet the actions. And we need to understand why we were never able to meet these actions within the pursued defined timelines. What would have caused it? So that in future, we understand the gaps. What would have triggered the gap so that we don't make the same mistakes again?
One of the documents included is the report done of our progress
Yes.
in implementing the Madrid plan, and that document, I think it came from OPM. It is in your, it's one of
All
the
right.
documents.
So I will look at
That
it.
may indicate what government's priorities would have been.
Would have been.
And how far we had gone in relation to implementing those priorities.
Right. And I also take note of the fact that, you know, you would have indicated that various ministries control the legislative framework.
Yes.
And I can understand how they can set priorities, but is there an interface within your your division and these ministries in relation to constant review of the reform process?
It is not as constant as we would like, and
Yeah.
it is something that we're actively seeking to ramp up. But at this point, we, for example, would have taken the Towns and Communities Act and would have prepared a policy proposal for its reform. But then we don't have any control over it once we have sent that proposal to the respective ministry. We hope that it will be given priority attention, and we follow up from time to time. But I can't say that we're able to influence the timing of when priority attention is given.
Would I be correct in stating that in the respective ministries, if there is a defined personnel for this kind of activity, would it help? I mean, the capacity.
It certainly would, and I do believe that the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs has been very, very assiduously seeking to have ministries put in place committees that would be actively required to consider the legislation under their portfolio that are in urgent need of reform. The
right.
Ministry of Local Government, not to single them out, but they have perhaps quite a large amount that require
urgent attention.
Yes, the Poor Relief Act being one of them, as we had discussed earlier. Yes.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Senator Gill. Senator Fraser-Bint.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Wilkins, thank you so much for that presentation, and I will actually use the opportunity to do some reading because I'm very intrigued by some of the proposed legislation, legislation you've shared with some from other countries. But you note in your presentation that we have not signed on to the International Convention and the laws of the elderly. And I wondered whether in your research, if there were anything that you saw in this particular convention that you think would be of benefit to us, or that we ought to consider in designing this policy out of this committee.
No, I wouldn't say that I saw anything like that. But what I think is that we have been observing the United Nations principles. We have sought to implement the Madrid Plan of Action on Aging, and therefore I think we're moving in the same direction as the convention. So this may be the reason.
Okay, so we do not stand to lose anything from not signing at this point?
No, not as far as I can tell now, no.
Thank you.
Ms. Wilkins, I wonder if the committee is obviously going to go on to hear other stakeholders. My desire, expectation, I'm sure the committee members join me, is that legal reform will continue to monitor.
We intend to, Chair. We intend to be present at your sittings, and wherever any further assistance is required of the department, we will certainly provide it.
We're grateful for that support, and to that end, I would therefore ask that as we move on the basis of this document that you have provided for us, and we thank you for that again, and in relation to the submissions that may come from other stakeholders, yes, if you could begin to help us by collating a document that would sort of capture the broad proposals for the contemplated act, that we could at the end of the day, you know, tweak, discuss, whatever. It sounds like I'm saying something like a matrix that Parliament does. That's not actually what I'm saying. What I'm hoping is that we would take a look at a document that speaks to the particular issues that an Elderly Care and Protection Act, and I'm using that term loosely, that's not the name of the contemplated act in any final sense. But a document that would say that kind of legislation should address these areas in its provisions, not in the general sense, but sort of breaking down the kind of provision that we should contemplate as we, you know, as our proposals for such a future.
Understood, Chair. We certainly will be able to do that.
Thank you so very much for that.
I'm so sorry. I know time is upon us, but I'm just going back to the presentation. And Ms. Wilkins, did we mention the Mental Health Act?
No, we didn't mention the Mental Health Act.
Okay. And I just want to put that as something, though it speaks to mental health, I think for obvious reasons, we may want to put that as one of the pieces of legislation that we should look at. And Chair, we can discuss the reason for that at the next sitting, but I think it's important.
Yes.
Noted, Senator.
Ms. Jimenez, we had distributed to the members the laws, relevant laws by email? Yes, okay, I just want to, and was the Mental Health Act one of them? Okay, can we add that to the list, please? Yes, thank you. Very well. It seems therefore that we're at the end of our business for today. I think the timing is right for that as well. I want to thank the Legal Reform Department again, Ms. Wilkins and Ms. Roden, for your very, very extensive work. And I thank you for your continued support as the committee moves forward in its deliberations. Thank you to my colleagues, Senators Fraser-Bin and Longmore, Senators Dr. Morris and Gale, who were present with me in the chambers, and most importantly to the parliamentary team, the committee clerk, our legislative council, and our orderlies in the chamber for the work that they do to support us. I want to also thank our IT department, and I want to just underscore the importance of our IT department who facilitate these meetings in hybrid format. And I know we'll continue to ensure we're properly ready and prepared for our meetings and supporting us throughout our committee meetings. So thank you to the IT team as well. There being no other business today, we have in place, well, next week, Parliament prorogues, and we have the state opening of, the ceremonial opening of Parliament. I'm correct in that? Yes. So I do not anticipate that we will meet next week. We have invited, our next presenters will be the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. I'm going to ask Madam Clerk, excuse me, can we confirm with them a date in the following week or the week after that? To come and present. I will say, as members know, that we do go into the budget process in the Parliament, and so it may become a little difficult in terms of dates, but as this is a select committee of the Senate, I'm not anticipating that the membership will have a challenge meeting in between the periods whenever we can grab some dates from the Parliament. So we will adjourn for a date to be fixed, and members will be notified in the usual manner when next we meet. Thank you all so much. Senator Gale, I thank you for your motion for adjournment. Senator Fraser-Binns, I thank you for seconding it.
Very well, Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone.